Did Emily Stowe's actions impact women's rights in Canada in the 20th century? Yes, the actions Emily Stowe took to improve the rights of women later contributed to women in Canada and had a big influence on how they were treated in the 20th century. Before World War I, women were seen as lesser people compared to men and were more than often treated unequally. The time it took for a women's suffrage movement to progress was far too long. This was largely due to the fact that, at the time, women were attempting to change the character they've been given to play their entire lives. The concept that a woman had no place in politics, or anything that was outside of the household for that matter, was widely recognized. The women's suffrage movement in Canada was first introduced in 1876 and was led under the influence of Dr. Emily Howard Stowe. Stowe's actions towards women's rights were kindled through her struggles in finding an education for herself. Through the countless number of rejections, she became a recognized advocate for women's rights. The struggle for gender equality faced in society at the time was clearly evident, but it is because of individuals like Stowe who believed women could achieve so much more that molded modern women's rights and how women are treated in our world today. Emily Stowe, although not as well known in Canadian history as women like the Alberta Five, is equally as important in contributing to the growth of women empowerment in Canada during the early 19th century. Believing strongly in both her own self-worth and in her right to an education, she pursued her dream in teaching, only to be rejected by Victoria College solely due to the fact that she was a female. The rejection of her own education sparked her determination to become more than what society was telling her to be. In 1854, she graduated from the Normal School for Upper Canada and was offered a job as a principal at Brantford Public School. Accepting the job, she broke the social norms of a woman's role in society by becoming the first female principal of a public school. These events were the birth of Stowe's dedication to obtain equality rights for women in Canada. Years later, after her husband was diagnosed with tuberculosis and realizing that there was an immense need for women physicians in the medical world to deal with the concerns of women, she decided to pursue a career in medicine. Unfortunately for her, she was again denied a place in education, this time at the University of Toronto, merely because of her gender. Receiving a reply that declared that the doors of the university are not open to women and I trust they never will be, she enrolled in a medical university in New York and became the first woman in Canada to practice medicine. Her response to the University of Toronto, which was, "The day will come when these doors will swing wide open to every female who chooses to apply," was soon proven true in 1997, the year where the leading gender graduating from Canadian medical schools were women, a theme that has been progressing for over the past 10 years. As an advocate for women's rights, Stowe founded Canada's first suffrage organization after attending a meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Women. The club was titled the Toronto Women's Literary Club, a name carefully chosen by its leaders to avoid public controversy about the club's true intentions. Disguised as what seemed to be a women's book club, the group discussed a large variety of issues from women's education to women's economic, social, and political status in the country. While discussing these issues, they soon realized that nothing could be properly addressed until women were allowed in politics, and so their goal was determined. After announcing the club's true purpose for existing in 1883, the club's name was changed to Canadian Women's Suffrage Association. Not wanting any other woman to go through what she did to get an education, she created Canada's first medical college for women in 1883 and fought for the right for women to receive an education alongside many other Canadian suffragists in the Canadian Women's Suffrage Association. In 1883, medical colleges for women were being set up in both Toronto and Kingston, and in 1884, roughly 20 years after Stowe was denied entry in the Toronto School of Medicine, women won the right to be accepted into the University of Toronto after progressive petitioning by Stowe and other suffragists. This huge achievement acted as a stepping stone for women's education all throughout Canada. Slowly, one by one, universities all across the country were beginning to allow admission to women. This was considered one of the organization's most successful accomplishments because the acceptance of women into universities continued to increase. This also opened up more possibilities for women in professional organizations. The actions Stowe took to make this happen impacts the lives of any woman wanting a post-secondary school education in Canada in the 20th century. Although the Canadian Women's Suffrage Association brought attention to the issue of women's rights and social responsibilities to the public, they were no closer to achieving their goal. It was not until 1893, when the organization became the National Council for Women, that the club's geographical focus broadened. Local councils of women began developing in communities all around Canada. This brought attention to the women's suffrage movement on a national level. Despite the fact that it would be a long fight before women could have a role in politics, the main goal of the original Toronto Women's Literary Club was met when women were granted the right to vote in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta in 1916. This was followed by British Columbia and Ontario in 1917, Nova Scotia in 1918, New Brunswick in 1919, Prince Edward Island in 1922, Newfoundland in 1925, and Quebec in the 1940s. Although these events happened 14 years after Stowe's death, she was credited and recognized as one of the founders of the women's rights movement in Canada. Since the 1870s, women's suffrage groups have existed because a handful of suffragists like Dr. Emily Howard Stowe believed that women should receive the same rights as men. Tired of being considered the weaker gender, women like Stowe fiercely fought for equality so that women in the 20th and 21st century could live equally with men. She overcame many obstacles throughout her life and used these experiences to try to help other Canadian women to avoid going through what she did. Although Stowe did not live to witness the results of her actions years afterwards, she played a substantial role in the beginning of the women's suffrage movement and is one of the reasons behind the way women are treated in the early 20th century.